There are some bizarre Olympic events, from the steeplechase to race walking, but butterfly always struck me as particularly unusual. I kind of assumed at some point there was a person who couldn't swim as fast as the other swimmers normally, but while messing around, he figured out he could swim faster than everyone else this weird way. And then some other people saw him swimming that weird way and thought it was actually pretty cool. Then eventually some swimming committee got together and standardized it all to make it into a real event. Well, I looked it up. Turns out that's not what happened. The origins of butterfly is not a story of invention. It's a story of innovation. In swimming, like many fields, most improvements are made through optimization, the micro adjustments that help achieve maximum efficiency. But occasionally, an innovation causes a total regime shift that changes the game forever. I love innovators. I love the idea of a person ignoring years, decades, even centuries of conventional wisdom to go in a different direction and discover a better way that no one saw before. I want to parallel the story of the butterfly with one of the most famous innovations in all of Olympic history. In the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City, Dick Fosbury shocked the world with his Fosbury flop high jump technique. The flop was so unconventional, his college coach tried to talk him into using a more standard approach, claiming Fosbury was wasting his potential. The form is highly counterintuitive at first, but it was so effective that no one has been able to win an Olympic gold in the high jump by jumping any other way ever since. In similar fashion, Australian swimmer Sidney Cavell identified that breaststroke swimmers were slowed considerably as they moved their arms forward through the water. He then worked to develop the butterfly technique in which the swimmer would bring their arms forward above the water, eliminating the slowest part of the stroke. For the next couple of decades, the butterfly technique dominated breaststroke competition until 1952 when it was made into its own stroke with its own set of rules, and breaststroke rules were altered to outlaw the butterfly. But that's not the whole story, because what happens when you drop the romanticism of innovation and look at these two situations from a different perspective, a new narrative starts to emerge. One could make the argument that these men were not so much innovators as they were exploiters of loopholes. Because while they technically stayed within the letter of the rules, they could be seen to have broken the spirit of the rules. Now this is a practice that some see in a positive light, calling it shrewd or clever, but others would consider it unsportsmanlike. To elaborate, I'll start out by quickly looking at the high jump. All of the precursors to the Fosbury flop, from the scissor jump to the straddle to the western roll, all ended up with the jumper more or less landing on their feet. Landing on your feet was never a requirement for the high jump, but for most of its history, the landing pit was sawdust. If Fosbury landed on his back in sawdust after jumping well over 2 meters into air, he may well have broken his back. Moving right along to the butterfly, to understand the spirit of the rules that dictate breaststroke, all you have to do is look at the history of swimming. Competitive swimming as we know it was originated in England in the early 1800s, and the stroke of choice for the British at the time was breaststroke. Even after two Native American swimmers named Flying Gull and Tobacco displayed how much faster the front crawl is in comparison to the breaststroke in a competition in 1844, the English largely stuck with it. From the limited information I found out about this, it seems like the reasoning for keeping the breaststroke around is the front crawl is awkward and involved too much splashing. Too much splashing. Well, it's a good thing the butterfly stroke is renowned for having very few jerky, awkward movements as the swimmer glides along, hardly crashing both arms into the water at all. So there you have it. Butterfly exists because someone found a loophole in the rules of breaststroke, a stroke which itself only exists because some British people in the mid-1800s thought it was more gentlemanly than the faster alternative. Then instead of closing said loophole, butterfly was made into its own event. If that doesn't strike you as odd that butterfly was made into its own event, I pose this series of questions. Why wasn't the high jump split into separate categories, having the flop event where a jumper can land any way they want, and the western roll event where the jumper must land standing up? Why was the breaststroke allowed to keep coming back after it was made obsolete twice? What differentiates an innovator from a loophole exploiter? That's all for today. Next time I will try to answer some of the big questions on everyone's mind when I talk about how all of this relates to meritocracy.